Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. I sat at the dinner table, staring at the untouched plate in front of me while the conversation buzzed around me. Megan was at the center of it, as usual, laughing, flashing that effortless charm of hers, making everyone at the table feel like they were in on some grand joke. I used to love that about her, the way she could command attention without trying. Now, it just felt like a reminder of how insignificant I had become in my own home. "Daniel, tell them about that thing at work," Megan said suddenly, waving a hand toward me like I was a side character in her show. My stomach tightened. I cleared my throat. "Oh, it's nothing big, oh, come on." She cut me off, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Daniel's working on this big renovation project downtown, but he's too humble to brag about it." She turned to her sister, Liz, and smirked. "You know how he is. If I didn't force it out of him, he'd probably go his whole life without saying anything interesting." Laughter rippled around the table, and a familiar heat crept up my neck. I should have been used to it by now, the way Megan loved to turn me into the butt of her jokes. It wasn't always like this. In the beginning, she made me feel like I was the most capable, impressive man she had ever met. Now, it was like she had taken that pedestal and smashed it to pieces, leaving me to sift through the remains. I forced a chuckle and took a sip of my beer. "It's just another job," I said, keeping my voice even. Megan clapped her hands together. "See? Classic Daniel. No sense of flair." She turned to Liz again. "Honestly, I think I should start coaching him on how to sell himself better. If he ever had to talk his way out of something, I swear he'd just apologize and hope for the best." The laughter that followed this time had a sharper edge to it, and my grip tightened around my glass. Megan didn't even look at me. She had already moved on, talking about her latest work trip, some high-end resort she was considering for a client retreat. I tuned out, my mind drifting to the pile of bills I had sorted through earlier, the ones Megan barely glanced at before tossing them aside. After dinner, I started clearing the plates while Megan kept entertaining. No one seemed to notice me standing at the sink, scrubbing at a dish harder than necessary. It wasn't until Liz came over and bumped her shoulder against mine that I realized how tightly I was holding myself. "She's being a little extra tonight," Liz said under her breath. I let out a short laugh. "You get used to it." She tilted her head, studying me. "You shouldn't have to." I turned off the water, wiping my hands on a towel. "It's just how she is." Liz hesitated, then sighed. "Daniel, do you ever wonder if this is normal?" The question sat between us, heavy and unspoken for too long. Normal. I wanted to tell her that, yes, of course it was. That every couple has their quirks, their ways of communicating. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't normal. The way Megan dismissed me, the way she talked over me, the way she made sure I always felt one step behind. But saying it out loud made it real, and I wasn't ready for that. I forced another smile. "It's fine, Liz." She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. She just gave my arm a small squeeze before heading back to the table. By the time everyone left, Megan was in a good mood, humming as she scrolled through her phone. I sat on the couch, pretending to watch TV, but my mind was still replaying Liz's words. Megan sighed dramatically. "God, that was exhausting. Your family is so much." "Ich glänzte her." "You mean my family? You were the one doing most of the talking." She laughed, tossing her phone onto the coffee table. "Well, someone had to keep things interesting." I clenched my jaw. "You don't have to put me down to do that." Megan blinked at me, then rolled her eyes. "Oh, don't start. It's just joking around, Daniel. Don't be so sensitive." The thing was, I wasn't sensitive. Not first, but years of small, cutting remarks, of being made to feel like an afterthought in my own marriage had worn me down. "I'm tired," I said finally, standing up. Megan scoffed. "Yeah, well, you should be. You barely contributed to the conversation tonight." I turned to look at her, really look at her. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with. And for the first time, I felt something shift inside me. I didn't respond. I just walked upstairs, leaving her to her scrolling. In the quiet of our bedroom, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. I didn't recognize the man looking back at me. Liz's words echoed in my head. "Do you ever wonder if this is normal?" For the first time, I let myself consider the answer. And I didn't like what I found. The air was thick with laughter and the low hum of conversation, but all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing. I sat stiffly at the edge of the couch, my drink untouched in my hand, while Megan held court in the center of the room. Her voice rang out, bright and confident, as she entertained our friends with another story that, somehow, made me look like an idiot. "So, we're at this fancy restaurant last week, right?" she began, smiling as she gestured wildly. "The kind of place where they bring out plates that look like art instead of food. And Daniel, sweet, simple Daniel, takes one look at his dish and asks the waiter, is this the appetizer?" The room erupted into laughter. I forced a smile, shifting uncomfortably as the attention settled on me. "It was tiny," I muttered, but my voice was drowned out by Megan's dramatic reenactment. "I mean, he looked like a lost little boy," she continued, wiping an imaginary tear from her eye. "I thought he was going to ask for a kid's menu." More laughter. I felt my face heat up as I stared down at my glass. It wasn't just the joke. It was the way she told it, the way she framed me as this clueless, bumbling husband while she played the role of the worldly, sophisticated wife. It was a story she had told a dozen times before, just with different details. I stole a glance at our friend Jason, who sat across from me. He wasn't laughing. His brow was furrowed, and when our eyes met, he gave me a look. Not pity, but something close to it. I looked away. Megan clapped her hands together. "Anyway, moral of the story, don't take Daniel anywhere too fancy. He might try to order a cheeseburger at a steakhouse." Another round of laughter. That was it. The moment I snapped. I set my drink down carefully, feeling the weight of every second stretching out before me. "You know, Megan," I said, my voice steady, "it's funny how all your stories make me look like an idiot. I wonder why that is." The room went silent so fast, it was like the air had been sucked out of it. Megan blinked, the smirk slipping from her face. "Oh, come on, it's just a joke." I leaned forward, resting my arms on my knees. "Yeah? Because from where I'm sitting, it doesn't feel like one." She scoffed, forcing out a laugh, but it was brittle now. "Oh, don't be so dramatic." I tilted my head. "Am I being dramatic? Or are you just mad I finally called you out?" A ripple of unease passed through the room. Jason shifted in his seat, looking at his wife, Erin, who was suddenly very interested in the label on her wine bottle. No one wanted to be here for this. I didn't care. Megan's eyes flashed. "You're really going to make a scene over a joke?" I let out a slow breath, feeling something inside me settle. "No, Megan. I think the real scene is the one you've been putting on for years. And I'm done playing the fool in it." A muscle in her jaw twitched. She looked around, as if expecting someone to jump in and defend her, to tell me I was overreacting, but no one did. Maybe they had all seen it too, the way she chipped away at me in these little, subtle ways. Maybe they had just never heard me push back before. Megan scoffed and grabbed her drink, taking a long sip. "Unbelievable," she muttered, but the confidence in her voice had wavered. I sat back, exhaling slowly. The silence stretched a little too long before someone, Jason, I think, cleared his throat and tried to steer the conversation into safer waters. But the air in the room had changed. Megan kept her smile plastered on, but I could see the way her fingers clenched around her glass. I knew that look. She was furious. By the time our friends left, the tension was so thick I could barely breathe. As soon as the front door closed, Megan whirled on me. "What the hell was that?" I shrugged. "I don't know." "What was that?" "Don't play dumb, Daniel." She snapped, her eyes blazing. "You embarrassed me." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, I embarrassed you? That's rich." Her nostrils flared. "You know what I meant. You made me look bad in front of everyone." I crossed my arms. "I didn't have to make you look bad, Megan. You did that all on your own." She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "You're so sensitive. It was just a joke." "Was it?" I asked. "Because it felt like more than that. It felt like the 100 other times you've done the exact same thing. The comments, the little digs. The way you make me feel like I'm some bumbling idiot while you play the perfect wife." She stared at me, caught off guard by the weight in my voice. "You're overreacting." I shook my head. "No, I'm just finally reacting." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The room felt too big, too small at once. Then Megan sighed dramatically, rubbing her temples. "God, I don't have the energy for this right now." She turned and started up the stairs, muttering under her breath. "We'll talk when you're done being ridiculous." I stood there, staring at the empty space where she had been, my heartbeat steady and slow. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I felt like I had just taken the first real breath in years. And I wasn't sure I could go back to holding it. The silence between us stretched for days. Megan barely spoke to me, retreating into her world of emails, phone calls, and carefully curated social media posts. I didn't mind. If anything, I prefer the quiet. It gave me space to think, to examine the cracks in our marriage that I had ignored for too long. But mostly, it gave me time to notice the little things. Like how Megan suddenly started taking more weekend trips. It had started off as an occasional thing, an overnight stay here, a last-minute business trip there. But in the past few months, the pattern had shifted. Every other weekend, she was off to some new site visit, scouting high-end rental properties for her travel agency. She always had an excuse, an exclusive client, a potential partnership, something too important to pass up. I had always trusted her, or maybe I had just never let myself consider the alternative. But now, with everything else weighing on me, I started paying attention. It was a Friday morning when I found the first clue. Megan was already gone, having left before sunrise for another supposed work trip. I had taken a day off, intending to spend it fixing things around the house, anything to keep my mind occupied. As I gathered up a pile of laundry from our bedroom, Megan's open laptop caught my eye. She never left it open. I wasn't proud of what I did next, but something in me, something that had been gnawing at my gut for weeks, urged me forward. I sat down, hesitated, then clicked into her email. The first thing I saw was a confirmation for a private couples retreat. My blood ran cold. The subject line read, "Thank you for your reservation." My hands moved on their own, clicking into the email before I could talk myself out of it. "Dear Megan, we're pleased to confirm your upcoming stay at Whispering Pines Lake House. Your weekend itinerary includes a couple's massage, a private wine tasting, and a sunset boat tour. We look forward to making your getaway unforgettable." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my ears. A couple's retreat. She hadn't mentioned this one. I scrolled further. The reservation was made 2 weeks ago, right after our last fight. My breath came shallow as I checked the payment details. The charge wasn't on our shared credit card. She had used her personal account. I sat back in the chair, staring blankly at the screen. There was no innocent explanation for this. None. The weight of it settled over me, pressing down until I could barely breathe. My mind raced, trying to piece together the timeline, the small, offhand comments she had made about these trips, the way she had started dressing differently, wearing perfume to work meetings, the sudden obsession with her phone, always angled away from me, always silenced when she set it down. I had been blind, or maybe I had just been willing to believe the version of my life I wanted to be true. I forced myself to move, to keep searching. My hands trembled as I opened her messages. And there it was. "Megan, I can't wait to see you tonight." Unknown number. "Same, baby." Counting down the hours. I felt something inside me crack. I scrolled further, my stomach twisting as I took in the messages. Plans for dinner. Inside jokes I didn't understand. Mentions of missing each other. And then, finally, a name. "Megan, I wish we had more time, Carter." Carter. A name I didn't recognize. A name that didn't belong in my marriage. I clenched my fists, breathing through the sharp sting of betrayal. I should have been furious. I should have thrown her laptop across the room, shattered it the way she had shattered our vows. But instead, I felt something colder. Clarity. I had spent years letting Megan chip away at me, convincing myself that the little humiliations weren't that bad, that the sharp words and dismissive looks were just part of who she was. But this was different. This wasn't just cruelty. It was calculated, and I wasn't going to let it go unanswered. I closed the laptop carefully, my mind already working through the steps. I needed proof. Real proof. Something she couldn't explain away with another one of her quick, dismissive lies. The rage came later, slow and simmering, burning in the pit of my stomach as I moved through the house in a daze. By the time the sun had set, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I was going to wait. I was going to watch. And when the time was right, I was going to make sure Megan regretted every single choice she had made. I moved through the house in trance, my mind cycling through every moment over the past year, dissecting Megan's every word, every lie. Now that I knew the truth, everything clicked into place. The way she dismissed me, the way she made me feel small. It wasn't just about control. It was about justification. She had been treating me like an afterthought because, to her, I already was one. But I wasn't going to act on emotion. That's what she expected. A fight, a dramatic confrontation, maybe even an argument she could twist to make herself the victim. No, if I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. I pulled out my phone and searched the name of the lake house from the email. It didn't take long to find the property's website, complete with a contact the owner button. I hesitated for only a second before clicking it and drafting a message. Hi, I'm interested in purchasing Whispering Pines. Is the property available? It was a long shot, but if this place was still on the market, I was about to make sure Megan's little getaway would be her last. While I waited for a response, I started gathering evidence. I backed up her messages, took screenshots of the emails, and forwarded everything to a private account. Then I went into our shared finances, looking for any other hidden transactions. Megan was careful. She had used her personal credit card for most of it, but there were traces. Charges for expensive dinners, hotel stays that didn't line up with her supposed business trips. I cataloged everything. By the time I was done, my pulse was steady, my anger controlled. I wasn't spiraling. I wasn't panicking. I was preparing. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Hello, Daniel, it read. Thank you for your inquiry about Whispering Pines. The property is still available, and we're entertaining serious offers. Let me know if you'd like to schedule a call to discuss details. I exhaled slowly. This was happening. Yes, I'm very interested. Let's set up a time to talk. Over the next few days, I played the part of the oblivious husband while setting my plan in motion. I spoke with the property owner, reviewed the terms, and secured financing. Megan barely noticed. She was too busy packing for her business trip, too busy smiling at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. The night before she left, I sat beside her on the couch, watching her scroll through her messages. Excited for your trip? I asked casually. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. Yeah, it's going to be a great opportunity. Might even lock in a few new clients. I nodded. That's great. You work so hard, Megan. You deserve some time away. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Thanks. I knew what she was thinking, that I was as blind as ever, that she had one. The next morning, she kissed me on the cheek like she always did, grabbing her bags with an ease that made my stomach turn. I'll be back Sunday night, she called over her shoulder. I watched her walk out the door, my hands steady at my sides. Sunday couldn't come soon enough. By the time Megan arrived at Whispering Pines, I was already there. I sat on the porch, sipping a beer, the property deed resting on the table beside me. The sun had just started to set, casting a golden glow over the water. Peaceful, the perfect setting for what was about to happen. I heard the tires on the gravel before I saw them. Megan's car pulled up, sleek and polished, and from the passenger side emerged a man I had never met but already despised. Carter. He was tall, confident, dressed in an expensive jacket like he'd stepped right out of a luxury magazine. Megan laughed at something he said, touching his arm as they walked toward the cabin. Then she saw me. Her smile froze, her steps faltering. Daniel. I leaned back in the chair, lifting my beer in greeting. Welcome home, sweetheart. Carter stopped beside her, his brow furrowing. Who the hell is this? I let the silence stretch, savoring the way Megan's face drained of color. That's a good question, Megan, I said finally. Who the hell am I? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Panic flickered across her face as her eyes darted from me to Carter, back to me. What are you doing here? I reached for the document beside me, holding it up for her to see. Oh, just enjoying my new property. Bought it this week. Thought I'd come check it out. I let that sink in, watching as her expression shifted from shock to horror. So imagine my surprise when my wife showed up with her boyfriend. Carter's face twisted. Wait, wife. Megan turned to him, scrambling for an explanation. Carter, I can explain. Save it. I cut in. You've done plenty of explaining already. To him. To me. to God knows how many others. I shook my head, feeling the anger bubble just beneath the surface. But I have to thank you, Megan. If it weren't for you, I never would have found this place. And trust me, I plan on putting it to good use. Her voice wavered. Daniel, please. Let's just go home and talk about this. I laughed, low and humorless. Go home? Megan, this was home to you, wasn't it? This is where you built your little fantasy life, where you got to pretend you were someone else. But guess what? I stood, letting my chair scrape against the wooden deck. Fantasy's over. Carter shifted uncomfortably. Look, man, I didn't know she was married. I held up a hand. I don't care. You can have her. I turned back to Megan, my voice cold. But you won't be coming back here. Not unless you plan on renting. Because this isn't your little getaway anymore, Megan. It's mine. She looked at me, pleading. Daniel, don't do this. I smiled. Already did. I grabbed my beer, stepping off the porch and walking past them without another word. As I got into my truck, I watched Megan sink to the steps, her hands covering her face, while Carter stood there, looking like he had just been punched in the gut. As I drove away, the lake house disappearing in my rearview mirror, I felt something I hadn't in years. The drive home was quiet. No radio, no distractions, just the hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white, the weight of what I'd just done settling in my chest. I had imagined this moment so many times, but now that it had happened, there was no rush of triumph. No satisfaction, just a strange, hollow calm, like standing in the eye of a storm, waiting for the next wave to hit. I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a moment, staring at the house Megan and I had shared for years. It didn't feel like home anymore. Maybe it never really had. The porch light flickered, casting long shadows over the front steps, and I exhaled, pushing the door open. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against your skin. I walked inside, past the framed pictures on the wall. Our wedding day, a vacation we took to Napa, the forced smiles and distant looks I had ignored for too long. I made my way to the kitchen and poured myself a drink, the ice clinking against the glass as I took the first slow sip. Megan was going to come home soon. I knew that much. She wasn't the type to accept defeat so easily. She'd show up, maybe in tears, maybe in fury, spinning some desperate narrative where I was the villain and she was the misunderstood victim. But it didn't matter. Nothing she said would change what I'd seen, what I knew now. The hours dragged by, and just as I expected, the front door burst open a little after midnight. Megan stormed in, her face flushed, her hair a mess. She had driven straight from the lake house, and judging by the wild look in her eyes, she had spent every mile rehearsing whatever speech she was about to unload. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she demanded, slamming the door behind her. I took another sip of my drink and leaned against the counter, watching her. Long drive, her hands curled into fists at her sides. "You humiliated me, Daniel. You ambushed me like some psycho. Do you have any idea what you just did?" I set my glass down. "Yeah, Megan, I made sure your little love nest is off limits. And I'll let Carter know exactly what kind of woman he's been messing with." She scoffed, pacing the room like a caged animal. "You don't get to act like you're some innocent victim in all this." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, enlighten me." She turned, her eyes blazing. "Do you know why I did this? Do you even care? Because I spent years in this marriage feeling like I was suffocating. Like I was trapped with someone who never sees me." I let out a slow, measured breath. "You're kidding, right?" She threw up her hands. "You don't listen. You don't make me feel wanted. Everything is about you, your job, your routine. God, I needed something different." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You needed something different? So you lied? You snuck around? You made me feel like a fool in front of our friends. All because you were bored?" Her jaw clenched. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Megan?" I pushed off the counter, my voice sharper now. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like that." She shook her head, exasperated. "I made a mistake, okay? But do you really want to throw away everything over this?" I studied her, this woman I had once built my whole world around, and felt nothing but exhaustion. "You threw it away, Megan. The second you decided to take your little weekend trips, the second you let someone else touch you. You made that choice. I'm just following through on the consequences. She swallowed hard, her bravado slipping for the first time. Daniel, please. We can fix this. I shook my head. No, Megan, you can try to fix yourself. But I'm done. Her face twisted, her desperation turning to anger in an instant. You'll regret this. I smirked. Doubt it. She stared at me, waiting for me to crack, to show some sign that she still had control. But I didn't give her the satisfaction. I picked up my drink, turned, and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there with nothing but the wreckage of her own choices. Upstairs, I started packing. Not because I was running, but because I was done waiting for her to leave. I wasn't going to spend another night in this house, suffocating under the weight of her betrayal. My suitcase filled quickly, clothes, my laptop, the essentials. I didn't need much, just enough to start over. As I zipped up the bag, I heard her footsteps outside the bedroom door. She lingered for a moment before finally speaking, her voice smaller now. Where are you going? I didn't look at her. Somewhere that isn't here. She sniffed, and for a brief second, I almost thought she might cry. But she didn't. Megan didn't cry unless there was an audience. You don't have to do this. I finally turned to face her, meeting her gaze one last time. Yeah, Megan. Eat dough. And with that, I walked past her, down the stairs, and out the door. I didn't look back. The hotel room was quiet except for the low hum of the air conditioner. I had checked in late last night, after driving aimlessly for hours, trying to process everything. It was strange how empty I felt now that I had finally walked away. I had imagined rage, relief, something overwhelming, but instead there was just nothing. A dull ache in the back of my mind, like the echoes of a headache that hadn't fully faded. I sat on the edge of the bed, my phone in my hand, scrolling through missed calls. Megan had called 12 times, left 5 voicemails, and sent at least a dozen texts, each one shifting between fury, desperation, and forced indifference. Daniel, pick up the damn phone. You don't get to just walk out like that. We need to talk. You're being dramatic. Fine. Do whatever you want. But don't think for a second this is all on me. I tossed the phone onto the nightstand and rubbed a hand over my face. She was spiraling, trying to regain control, but I wasn't playing her game anymore. A knock at the door made me tense. My first thought was Megan, but she didn't know where I was. I stood, cautiously peering through the peephole, only to exhale when I saw Jason standing there. He had called a few times too, but I hadn't been ready to talk to anyone. I opened the door, stepping aside to let him in. You look like hell, he said, shutting the door behind him. I let out a dry laugh. Feels about right. Jason tossed a bag of takeout onto the table and pulled up a chair. Figured you hadn't eaten anything real in a while. I sat across from him, opening one of the containers, but I wasn't hungry. How'd you find me? He shrugged. Aaron said you'd probably get a room instead of going to a friend's place. I checked a few spots. He paused. You should have called me. I stabbed at the food with a plastic fork. Didn't feel like talking. Jason nodded, letting the silence sit for a moment. Megan came by my place this morning. I looked up, my grip tightening. She what? She was looking for you. Said she was worried, that you were acting crazy. He snorted. I told her she had a lot of nerve showing up like that. Aaron didn't even let her inside. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to unclench my fist. Of course, Megan was already spinning her narrative, already trying to make herself the victim. She'll do whatever she can to control the story. Jason leaned back, crossing his arms. Yeah, well, nobody's buying it. Everyone saw the way she treated you. She just didn't think you'd ever call her out on it. I stared down at my food, my appetite gone. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do next. Jason shrugged. You don't have to figure it all out right now. Just take it one step at a time. He hesitated. Are you going to file? The question sat heavy in the air. I had been avoiding it, avoiding the reality of what came next. But there was no fixing this. No salvaging anything. Yeah, I said finally. I'm done. Jason nodded, as if he had expected that answer. Good. Then the next step is making sure Megan doesn't screw you over in the process. We talked for a while after that, about lawyers, about strategy, about how to make sure I didn't end up getting dragged through hell in court. Jason had been through a rough divorce himself years ago, so he knew exactly how ruthless it could get. I took notes, made a plan, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had some control over my own life again. By the time Jason left, it was nearly midnight. I sat on the bed, staring at my phone again. Another missed call from Megan. Another voicemail. I hesitated, then pressed play. Her voice was softer this time, careful. Daniel, I know you're mad. And I know you think this is the end, but it doesn't have to be. We've built a life together. We can fix this. Please just come home. Let's talk. I deleted it without hesitation. The next morning, I met with a lawyer. Megan must have sensed it, because by the time I got back to the hotel, there were more texts waiting for me. I hope you're happy. I gave you everything, and this is how you treat me? You're making a mistake. I will not let you make me look like the bad guy in this. I smirked at that last one. Megan had spent years controlling how people saw us, how they saw me. She had built a version of herself that was polished, untouchable. But the cracks were starting to show, and she hated it. I turned my phone off and laid back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. I had no idea what my future looked like now. No idea where I would end up. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. The courthouse smelled like old paper and coffee. I sat in the waiting area, my fingers tapping absently against my knee, listening to the low murmur of voices around me. My lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Julia, sat beside me, reviewing the final documents one last time. Megan was late. Of course she was. She had always loved making me wait, loved being the one in control. But not today. Today, the power was shifting whether she liked it or not. I adjusted my tie, the knot suddenly feeling too tight. You think she's going to try something? Julia glanced up from her notes. It's possible. She's been stalling since the paperwork was served, so don't be surprised if she plays the poor, abandoned wife routine. I nodded, exhaling slowly. Megan had spent the last 2 weeks alternating between trying to manipulate me into dropping the divorce and threatening to make my life hell. She had shown up at my hotel once, pounding on the door, her voice thick with fake emotion. I had ignored her, watching through the peephole as she eventually stormed off, cursing under her breath. The messages had come in waves. First apologies, then rage, then cold threats about what she would do if I didn't handle this like an adult. A familiar click of heels echoed down the hallway, and I didn't even have to look up to know she had arrived. Megan always made an entrance. She walked in, her expression carefully composed, dressed in a sleek navy blazer and skirt. She looked polished, put together, exactly the way she wanted people to see her. But I could see the cracks, the tightness in her jaw, the slight tremor in her fingers as she adjusted her purse strap. She sat across from me, without a word, setting down a leather folder with a little too much force. Her lawyer, a stiff-looking man with thinning hair, sat beside her, barely glancing at me. The silence stretched between us until Megan finally spoke. This is ridiculous, Daniel. I leaned back in my chair. No, Megan. This is necessary. Her eyes flashed. We can still fix this. I tilted my head, studying her. Are you trying to convince me or yourself? She inhaled sharply, then turned to her lawyer. Let's just get this over with. The meeting room was small and windowless, a sterile space meant for quiet negotiations. But nothing about this was quiet. Megan fought for everything. More money, a bigger share of the assets, the house. She framed it as fairness, but I knew better. This wasn't about money. It was about winning. About punishing me for leaving before she could discard me first. Julia, thankfully, had come prepared. She laid out the evidence. The financial records, the infidelity, the hidden transactions. Megan's expression barely shifted, but I could see the way her nails dug into her palm. She hadn't expected me to be so thorough. Her lawyer cleared his throat. My client believes she's entitled to the marital home. Julia barely blinked. My client disagrees. He purchased the home. He has proof that he covered the mortgage while Mrs. Callahan spent weekends at luxury rentals with another man. Megan's lips pressed into a thin line. I need that house, Daniel. I shrugged. That's not my problem. For the next hour, we went back and forth. She made demands. We shot them down. She tried to guilt me. I didn't flinch. Julia did most of the talking, her voice calm and controlled, but I knew Megan was seething underneath that cold mask. She had expected me to cave, to be the same man she had spent years manipulating. But that man was gone. Eventually, her lawyer sighed. If we push this to trial, it could get messy. Julia smiled, all sharp edges. Yes, it could. Megan exhaled through her nose. Fine, she said tightly. But I want the furniture. I let out a short laugh. Take it. She blinked, caught off guard. What? I smirked. Take all of it. The couch, the dining table, the bed. Hell, take the curtains. It's all yours. I could see the frustration bubbling under her skin. She wanted to fight, wanted me to lash out so she could twist this into something that made her look like the victim. But I wasn't giving her that satisfaction. By the time we finalized the agreement, Megan looked exhausted. Her lawyer shook my hand stiffly before gathering his papers, while Megan sat there, staring at the table as if she could will it all to change. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. I never thought you'd actually go through with it. I stood, adjusting my jacket. That was your mistake. She lifted her gaze, her eyes searching mine for something, regret, hesitation, anything she could use. But I gave her nothing. I turned and walked out of the room without looking back. Outside, the afternoon sun was blinding. I loosened my tie, inhaling deeply as I stepped onto the sidewalk. The weight that had been crushing me for years was gone. There would still be paperwork, still final loose ends to tie up, but the hardest part was over. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Jason. How'd it go? I smirked, typing back. I won. And for the first time in a long time, I actually felt like it. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.